I'm so proud that this union has structures that are there specifically to make sure that all our members are protected and all our members have a voice, whoever they are and wherever they are. This film is to support all our LGBT members. We really hope that our work and our activism has helped make a more tolerant society. And when I say we, that means all of you, because you're the ones who've done the work. Today, I want to just make sure that I'm flagging up to you the Pride and Prejudice report that we did jointly with others. I want you to, if you can, make the time to read it, because it's got some really important information in there and it shows the kind of work that we as a trade union do. And it's important, I think, to put that in context. 2017 is 50 years since the start of decriminalisation of homosexuality within the UK. And when I say the start, it's because we know that though the law has changed and though attitudes have changed, there is still a lot of work to do. And that's what we as a trade union, full of people who are committed to social justice, should be part of. So I hope that with this book that I'm just going to flag up to you here, and to make sure that you actually read it, and with that, to hope that we as a union, you as members, carry on our work and make sure that we are part of anything that is about giving people justice, giving people a voice, giving people freedom. I'm proud, as I say, to be your General Secretary, and I really thank you for your time. More important for me, I thank you for standing up for those who stand beside you and for those who will come after. It makes a
Equality for me is a huge issue because it covers all sorts of strands of society. When you have politicians messing in equality, they can do it because they want to have votes and they see it as a vote winner, where really all they're using is stereotypes. And that's really why I don't tend to shout out about being a gay man. But I know for some people, for the President to be able to say that is a good thing, because not least of all, it makes it higher on the agenda. And maybe that in itself, it shouldn't need to be, but there we go. So if anyone wants to complain about LGBT not high enough on the agenda or anything else on equality, that's fine. They can send me emails direct. Just because I'm talking about equality today does not mean to say that I don't talk about non-LGBT or man's issues rather than women's issues or whatever. For me, equality is everybody. And that's why I say again about not being an issue. As far as I'm concerned, equality should be for everybody in the room, no matter who they are or what they consider themselves to be. There's always the opportunity for equality to move down agendas. I want to make sure that members, every single member, realise that I want equality at the top of the UCU agenda. And as far as I'm concerned, that means all equality strands. But that would be inclusive for equality and everyone else, every single member.
There are many ways you can challenge discrimination, both on a personal level. I had some staff who were quite homophobic, didn't want to be managed by a young gay man, and that's when I was young. But you have to, and it's only through lack of experience and lack of education, and they didn't actually understand. Within the prison we have a gay and trans prison group now for the offenders within the prison, our learners within the prison, which is something that several prisons are now set up and have got going in place. But that's only because we've done some background work, we've spoken to officers, we've spoken to governors, we've worked with those people and educated those people and talked to those people and said, look, you know, it's not something to be worried about, it's about letting people be themselves. And people are much happier that way. There are less stresses and worries. And it is all about this constant education of people.
I suppose more awareness in general of the difference between, as I said, acceptance and tolerance. Generally speaking, most of the work is done towards increasing the possibility of tolerance, because that's more of a structural issue, whereas it's a much more personal issue and approach to build up a level of active acceptance. It involves much more of a dynamic between small groups of people than, you know, a couple of seminars or lectures or ticking a box on a form to say we tolerate. Because when they say we accept, what they mean is we tolerate. So I suppose more awareness of that difference, and secondly of the very different issues and struggles that people of trans experience have, especially non-binary and agender people. And if you don't know what non-binary is, that's for those who do not fall within the socially determined binary between male and of male or female. They could fall somewhere in between with aspects of both, or they could actually not identify a gender within themselves at all. And for those people, they have also a much harder struggle because they're basically not recognised at all as really existing. So, for example, toilets. You might have a picture of showing a picture of a man and a woman, but if you're non-binary, you're neither of those. For myself, because I do, generally speaking, conform to what is expected of somebody who presents as female, it is in some respects easier for me than non-binary people who are almost kind of like blindly dismissed as not particularly relevant.
I'd just like to say that inclusivity, because that was on my card, is extremely important, as is intersectionality. For example, we know that statistics-wise, that black trans women in the United States have extremely high levels of victims of crime, hate, and are killed at ridiculous numbers. I think this year there's over 20 again, and we're just in December. So the message, I think, is that we all need to work together because there are forces that are working against equality. So onwards and upwards, and I think we all need to work together for a brighter future for everybody.
So one of the things I learned from my actual union training in activism is work on the things either really inspire you or really annoy you. And I get frustrated because we know that there's things that need doing, we know there's inequalities, we know what to do about it, we know what we want our employers to do, what we want to change in our teaching, in our research, and it just keeps not happening. I am completely fed up of pushing this, and it's about time it happened. Unions are good at making things happen. So that's why I'm part of UCU, and that's why I call upon colleagues and work with colleagues to actually make the changes, not just talk about them.
I think it's much easier for LGBT members to come out at work now. However, I don't want to say to everybody that everybody should be out all of the time. You have to choose how, where, when, and with whom you're out. When I was a primary school head teacher, I was out to the parents and to the staff, but I wasn't out to the kids. Except a group of girls in my year 6 one day came to me and talked to me about, oh, our big brothers say you're gay, da 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 da. And I sort of questioned them, do you know what that means? And we talked about it. And does that make any difference to me as your head teacher? And they were upset more that their brothers were calling me names. And we talked about that and about the abuse of power and ridicule and name calling, etc., etc. And in the end, I just said to them, yes, I am gay. You've met my partner. He comes into school on bingo evenings with your mum and dad and that sort of thing. That's my partner. And they were like, okay, yeah, fine. You know, it wasn't a big issue when you talked it through with them, but young people, I think, have an innate sense of what's right and what's wrong, and they saw that something was wrong and that their big brothers were being homophobic, although they didn't use that term, and they wanted to do something about it.
My experience of being LGBT at work is that when people become aware that I'm trans, or when people are able to determine or are told that I am of trans experience, is that my sexuality becomes utterly irrelevant to them. The gender experience difference totally swamps out any particular interest or reaction or response concerning my orientation. It's already become so other that nobody really cares. So my sexual orientation, yeah, irrelevant. I get a lot of support from our staff LGBT network, and I do get some support from a local UCU person. But I would say that there's a definite difference of attitude towards the way in which I'm treated. Generally speaking, within the academic staff and the direct supporters of the academic staff, there's a blind indifference tolerance to how I am treated and how I'm interacted with, as in, okay, we kind of know you're trans, but we don't want to go into any of that because that's just like too awkward and weird. With my students, I don't tell them, so it's irrelevant. And with the admin staff in general, it's on the whole more accepting. So I've had a lot more interaction with admin people and other academic staff who are LGBTIQA.
Our colleges and universities, and for that adult education centres and prisons, are all places of education and learning, and they should be open to everybody, and everyone should be able to feel free to use them. There are really simple things that any branch can do in terms of making LGBT people welcome into their branch. We should be talking to people, getting LGBT members and people like myself and others to come into colleges and talk. I recently did a talk for Teach First at Cambridge University in terms of recruiting LGBT teachers into the teaching force, because the government sees and everyone sees that we've got some very, very talented LGBT teachers and educators.
I don't think that any university is an entirely safe space for LGBT people, because every university has a massively diverse mix of people. Generally speaking, the academics are traditionally going to be white male. There's going to be a larger proportion of them, so a large proportion are going to be cis, a large proportion of them are going to be heterosexual, as it is mirrored within society as well. So there is always going to be a struggle for understanding from diverse backgrounds and experiences and drives and needs. So there is no truly safe space that you can have. My university rigorously responds to issues of blatant racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, LGBT phobia in general, but quite often it's long before that that the concept of safe comes about, because it's that underlying attitude about it.
I think that whilst we've come a long way with LGBT rights, there's a lot to do. I think the coverage of or LGBT visibility across different institutions is very patchy, inconsistent, not homogeneous at all. So there's more visibility that needs to take place in many campuses. And I also think that issues of intersectionality with other struggles for equality are really important, and I'm really happy that ECU is working on that. And also, hopefully, one day we'll be able to diversify the curriculum a lot more so that other voices can be also heard in the classroom.
That kind of like resonates with you then?
Being told by a member of staff the only reason I'm still single is because I can't choose a side.
I do think of myself primarily as an activist, and I do think of myself primarily as a rank and file activist, actually, because that is a term which is still really important to me. And if we look at the importance that trade unions have had historically, that's very important for me. It's about your working conditions. It's also about what it is that we work in, which is education, and I think that that's something which is key in terms of activism at the moment as well, especially with all the attacks on education through austerity.
I'm also involved in activism on trans rights. I'm also involved in activism against sexism. I'm also part of the BME network at my university. I'm also involved currently in organising Transgender Day of Remembrance at my university. and I'm the keynote speaker for it as well. So I'm quite involved in those kind of things, and I've been to conferences and been on panels talking about the legal system and how it impacts on trans people and gender diverse people. I'm involved in making sure that my university gets a specific trans policy for both staff and students, both not just policy and guidance, but also a kind of like a wish list of what we want to work towards in the future as well.
You see, I think that one of the roles of an LGBT rep is that you ensure that LGBT aspects of what your organisation is doing, what your union is doing, or what your branch is doing are brought to the fore. So that might be around things like policies, or it might be things like things around what management is doing, or it might be around the campaigns or industrial campaigns that you've got. In general, in branches, we feel that there isn't enough involvement of LGBT members, and actually that there isn't enough involvement of black members either. So, first of all, the branch has to be an active branch, and the sort of branch that has campaigns, and it has to be the sort of branch which wants to engage members. That branches mustn't wait for LGBT people to come forward and say, these are the LGBT issues. This is a trade union issue. This is an issue about your working conditions. This is an issue about the type of education which we're providing, the way that we relate to our students.
More awareness of the fact that, especially if you're trans, you don't even get much legal recognition, and acknowledgement that the fears can often be of a much more structural level. That the whole system might not be designed to accommodate those concerns, and those legitimate and justified concerns, because there is systemic discrimination and exclusion and barriers for the inclusion of trans people at all levels of society and in all environments. It's just a fact. It's that much. It is a struggle for so many trans people. So, yeah, more awareness and response when these kind of things are raised.
I was delighted that UCU was fighting on casualisation and on a gender pay gap. And on casualisation, for example, quite clearly that has very specific and clear implications for LGBT plus workforce as well.
The problem with training and seminars is, generally speaking, it only gets to those people who are interested in changing things anyway. It should be that, for example, whether one is cis or trans should be actually a separate part entirely, and it should be within a section that has additional information saying that this is regarded as protected information of a higher level of protection than we would, typically speaking of, comply to with the Data Protection Act. Just as sexual orientation should also be something that is protected far more vigorously than your name and address and birth date, which would fall under the general protections. So when we're teaching, we talk about something called unconscious bias. We talk about the instincts, the underlying structural racism if you're a person of colour, underlying structural sexism if you're a woman or non-binary, underlying cisnormativity if you're trans, underlying heteronormativity if you're LGB or any pansexual or any of the others. And those do exist. And the reason why we have kind of like blind anonymous marking is to try and counteract them, because we know that they are always there. It's that structural level that needs to be, as best as possible, responded to and accommodated, rather than to say, oh, no, our system's fine. It's like there are always ways you can make it better.
We already know about student bias and equality bias in student feedback, and we already know of the abusive way in which student feedback is reinterpreted as if it's some sort of evidence, which it isn't. I think these are specific issues. We've got a very, very clear equality focus. I think we need to organise against them. And actually, I think our greatest allies in that are students, because it's not like all students are homophobic. I think that's far too simplistic. So what we need to do is to work with students on that. Another Another thing, for example, which I pick out would be prevent. What sort of atmosphere are you creating in a university if you are singling out one particular group as an enemy within, as a group which cannot be reconciled to the dominant ideology or the dominant ideas of the institution? You can see that that will easily have implications, knock-on effects for other groups such as LGBT staff. And again, that's something which we've got to address. And the LGBT equality component of that has got to be central to the work that we do.
Well, the union is very good in supporting. The union produces materials, it produces pamphlets and booklets. We also have a very good network. We have excellent equality conferences. Come along to them. If you're a union member, please do. Feel free to come to those. They're a good day or two. You get to meet other activists. You get drawn into this union family, and you can volunteer yourself as much or as little as you want to do. But it's a really good way of getting involved in the union work, because the union is us after all. We as members are the union. The union isn't sort of an AA that does things for us and insures us. It's us participating, and it's us moving forward. And that's why I think the unions have been so integral to the LGBT movement and the whole legislative change that's happened over the last 10, 15 years. Remember, I was born as a criminal in the 1950s as a gay man. It was only in 1967 that partial decriminalisation came into place. In 2005, I had my civil partnership, and nowadays I'm allowed to be married if I wanted to be. So yes, it does sound like we've gained the sort of Garden of Eden, but there is still a long way to go. I look just across the Atlantic at what's happening, and I just think things that we've moved forward on, we can so easily go back on as well.
Within City University, I mean, the LGBT staff network, there are some gems within it who really do keep it going and really do work actively for LGBT rights and to make the system more accommodating, accepting, understanding and respectful of the differences that LGBT people experience. And they've been actively involved in helping to make sure that Transgender Day of Remembrance happens, and that we've got the support that we need there. They've been involved in trying to push through this trans policy. Every sexuality other than being straight, and every kind of like gender experience other than a cis experience. And that's a lot of different diversities and a lot of different experiences. But because of the way in which gender and sexuality are mixed into that in a often quite awkward way, it can end up with the more institutionally situated and historically longer term dominance and prominence within those groups to be driven from that. And very often trans becomes an afterthought.
The people who inspire me to be part of a social movement, to collectivize my action rather than doing things individually, are the black queer people who have led social movements to great success in the recent past. I'm thinking of the black queer people who have pioneered, spearheaded the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm also thinking about such people as Professor Audre Lorde, who is a deep inspiration for me.
Paul Sykes' work in 1958 on the pains of imprisonment, he discusses 5 deprivations suffered by people in prison. One of those is the deprivation of heterosexual relationships, and he's quite explicit about that. We need to be aware of these issues and challenge. If we don't challenge these issues, what impact will that have on LGBT students and students that are not LGBT? We really need to take that seriously.
It's really important to be in a trade union. What trade unions have done is made a fantastic contribution to getting rights at work for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and questioning people. The big thing today that I see still needs to be dealt with is harassment and bullying. So if it's happening to you, please report it. Report it to your union rep. UCU has done a lot, to ensure that their reps are trained. So come along and get the right support, because if you don't, then you're going to be invisible, and it's really important that we make those changes. It's our biggest fight yet.
If you think of the advances that we've had, and they've been absolutely huge, the advances that we've had. I mean, if you think in my own lifetime, to go from being illegal and not being able to be out at work, to reach a situation where my employer is, you know, there's a duty on the employer to promote LGBT equality, that is an enormous step forward. The thing is, I think that we have to be very careful not to be sucked into thinking that equality marks and badges and charters and all the rest of it are the end point, and that we've reached the point that we need to. And especially, I think, in the context, I'm talking about higher education now, but especially in the context where higher education institutions are giving over an enormous amount of money and people power to marketing and to advertising. And so my concern is that those equality markers and the charter marks, etc., appear as badges on websites to attract students in a marketing way rather than in a way which actually makes a difference and is true to changing the conditions for staff and for students. And I'm thinking in particular of LGBT plus staff and students on that.
I think that what I would want is for the branches and the members to highlight academics, highlight staff, highlight prominent members of history, people in history who are LGBT, and that care needs to be given as to as broad a range as possible of them, so that it doesn't appear to be dominated by one particular type of or another. There needs to be a broad range, but also to look within the universities themselves and their histories, to highlight within different universities, to go, well, this person was at our university in the 1960s. They hid their sexuality or their gender identity, but they went on to do this or that or the other. They created patents that went into creating mobile phone technology that we use today, or they were involved in kind of like, you know, fighting against the Nazis, to remind people that not just that we have a history, but our history is already intimately woven into the history of heterosexual cisgender people. History is not just the past. It's also ongoing. We're also still a part of it. We're creating it. And those people those historical elements, those continue through. So that's what I would say. Just make it big, bad, and loads of posters of, you know, really reactionary people going, yeah, this. And, you know, occasionally we caught up with them, their far-thinking thought. There.
Don't forget, we've got LGBT History Month coming up, and UCU Head Office have got some fantastic resources for that, both paper and digital. And at this point, I should point out there's a fantastic wall chart you can get, which has the LGBT history on it, and I want to see that up on branches. But what can you actually do? And let me ask you that question. What are you going to do for LGBT History Month? And I might well ask you as I come along.
I'd like to see all branches, like the National Executive, have reserved seats for LGBT equality officers, and to be promoting LGBT History Month every year in their branch through a branch function of some sort. Now, it's up for different branches to decide what to do, but it could be something so simple as just a wall display, a stall or a stand in the college foyer, a film screening and a talk after a film screening of a particular type of film. LGBT History Month is celebrating the partial decriminalisation of homosexuality, the 1967 bill. I would recommend people to show the film Victim with Dirk Bogarde in, good old black and white movie that really shows what life was like at the time and about the entrapment by police officers of gay men. And it's just a really good historical, social perspective on something. So that's a lesson in itself for someone there.